So when I invest, my biggest risk is that I'm not going to get a return on that investment. That often doesn't happen in a vacuum. It's about a whole society. So a healthy society, and I'm making a very sermon here, but like a big sermon, but the whole point here is that as institutional investors or as investors, we have capital direct. What kind of impact do we want to make? Is return our only focus? So if we're selling heroin and we get a big return, is that appropriate? Or do we want to have a sustainable farm? I'm using a very silly example, but a sustainable farm that produces food, produces income, and maybe doesn't give you quite the same return as selling arms or illicit drugs, but the impact is good and positive, and by default, your risk is reduced. Because by doing the right thing, if that's what you want to call it, you're de-risking. And we can get very technical about what risk means. And I know when you speak to an investment manager, they are going to give you ratios and various formulas, and those tools are very important in understanding the kind of financial risks that you're facing, the kind of returns that you need to get for the capital that you're putting out. But they're not necessarily always going to give you the impact outcome. And this how to judge that is one of the big things that is confronted by many institutional investors. I think when it comes to managing risk and perceiving what risk is, we are often guided by our regulators. So a regulator would probably give you some level of what it is that they think is acceptable as far as risk is concerned. We often see that expressed in investment guidelines, investment restrictions, investment regulation, blunt tools, because all they're going to tell you is you're not allowed to invest whatever. I'm trying to think of a silly example, but so they're going to tell you you can't do this. But that doesn't give you the meat and the essence of what you need to think about. When an investment manager is presenting to you, yes, we need to do the compliance tick. Obviously, it doesn't even go beyond that. But behind the investment compliance, how is it that we're going to evaluate? Okay, I've got many pages of notes here, and I don't want to bore you too much, but what we need to do in particular, and when it comes to risk, is there are the kind of risks that we face on a daily basis, and these risks don't allow us, or seeing them purely as risks, don't allow us to move beyond. And I've made this point several times, I apologize. But what I really wanted to call for and ask is, when we look at the risk, return, and impact matrix or measures, how are we using that as a strategic tool when making investment decisions? Because ultimately, when I am on a board of trustees or management board, I'm presented with an opportunity to deploy this capital in a way that would give the people we represent the best possible outcome. Now, that best possible outcome is not always going to be measured by a Eswatini ratio or I'm trying to think of some word, but I'm sure you've all seen them at your investment presentations, where the investment manager comes in and does a whole analysis of the risk, and then they possibly start talking about economic risks. So these are all big systemic things that you can't always control. Who's in government isn't often our individual the kind of investment or the kind of decisions that the government makes aren't always in our direct ability, but the kind of investments we make will hopefully, even within those guidelines, you're not allowed to do that, allow us to choose investments, and obviously they won't be all the investments that we have, that are nearly immune to these kinds of things. I'm not saying nothing is perfect, but some things are more immune to fluctuations and changes in governments than other things. And this is another opportunity to really look at alternative investments and understand the risk in each of them. And understand risk decisions. A person needs X to survive. This thing, and to risk in particular, is there are risks. We know that every action, walking out the door, is a risk. And when we get more specific, managers or custodians or board members, we understand one of the biggest risks is the risk of the assets that we are looking after not doing the right thing. And not doing the right thing would obviously be losing money, not generating appropriate investment returns. And when we look at what an appropriate investment return is, what is that linked to? Is it linked to this living wage or this living wage or some particular goal? I often hear talk around a replacement ratio, but a replacement ratio of someone who's already not earning a living wage, it's not going to make a real difference. So and if we can't provide that living wage, how do we conscientize the people that we look after, the members? It might be a difficult process, but it's definitely a risk that's worth considering and working on. And then how do we take that knowledge to encourage the government or the environment in which we operate to create a social wage that will help that living wage be a surviving wage for the person there. And then governance is no-brainer, as we've spoken about. So for me, that's really often how I view the risk, the risk to fail. Then when we come to how do we address this and what do we do to mitigate these risks? And when it comes to alternatives, I'm going to go back to what I said earlier on, because I'm sort of trying to conclude here, is that they may not exist at the moment, but there are structures that we can do, that we can create around alternative investments in particular, where some of those things that people talk about when investment managers come to present you and talk about credit risk and liquidity risk and all those other kind of the very sort of investment speak risks can be managed, and those can often be managed by structuring whatever investment you're working with in the correct way. And here's where we need to stand together as retirement funds and create opportunities. And I think what we've often waited for is someone to bring that solution to us. Whereas I think if there are enough people like-minded, we can take the solution out there. We can go and find the people who can help us de-risk. We can go and speak to some international financing organization and say, we don't want to take on that part of the risk. Will you take on that part, but we're happy to invest in these portions or take some of that, but the investment for us. And I think for me that's the one message I want to get out there today, is that there are opportunities to be proactive, and there are opportunities to make these investments that can actually change people's lives and give good investment returns without necessarily carrying all the risk. They may not be here today, but if there's an appetite, and I left this last to the end and a bit cynical, I also used to work in investment managers. As you remember, investment managers also need to make money. So if the product can be structured in such a way that it's beneficial to everybody, and the investment managers can also earn a fee because they'll be doing the work. I mean, it's only fair. Then we already know we're on the way. So demanding this kind of product that does all those things I was talking about earlier on, and is de-risked is definitely something that investment managers have the skills to do and probably the negotiating power to do than many of us as individual investment of retirement funds, but that doesn't exclude the retirement funds themselves doing that, for that kind of action to be taken, and then to just have a look at risk and allow ourselves to say that risks, yeah, negotiate those opportunities. How do we use those opportunities? And how much of that risk are we prepared to pay for? Or how much of that risk can we negotiate away? That's going to be the end of the formal, or not the formal, the end of my talk. And I'm going to invite some questions, and remember the questions are going to inform what we're going to be able to produce at the end of the day as a paper with more detail and possibly a call to action that you can take with you to your funds or to your service providers. Are there any questions or comments? Yes, sir.
Thank you, sir. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Lawrence Banze from PSPF. Thank you very much for this wonderful presentation that we have just done before us. However, I've got just a few questions that I have to make this morning. In your presentation, you spoke about the impact of investments in the societies that we live in. However, I didn't hear you speaking anything relating to maybe stochastic volatility, the volatility of interest rates, the hiking of interest rates over time. That has been a problem within South Africa and Eswatini. Secondly, is the depreciation of the rand. What is really happening there? The shortage of electricity, both Eswatini and in South Africa. The dirty water at Hammanskraal. All these are the effects on the volatility of the interest rate as well as the depreciation of the rand. So I just wanted you to make a comment or elaborate on that one. And also the implied volatility of what is relatively happening in the investment space within the two countries. Thank you.
Sorry, the last
the implied volatility,
okay,
what is currently happening in the investment space within Eswatini and South Africa.
All right, so
Done.
So thank you for those questions, and I think that's a really good point. I specifically avoided talking about the traditional risk measures, because I believe that when we're looking at the overall kind of risks faced by the fund, if I had to sit down and do a risk analysis of the environment in which I'm operating, all those things that you've mentioned would form part of it. So why I didn't go into that in particular, I'm not justifying, but it's a very good point. So when we sit down, do the risk analysis, we are definitely going to have to do that environmental scan. And there we're going to identify all these things you're talking about. How do we manage those risks or mitigate those risks? And that is why I was talking about the bigger ideas. Because when I'm a decision maker and I'm not an investment professional, I often don't understand. I feel those things and I see them, but I don't necessarily understand them in the same way as an investment manager would. So the aim here would hopefully be to